Malaysia is rich with biodiversity species and has a diverse fauna, with 307 species of wild animals, over 785 bird species, 567 species of reptiles, 242 species of amphibians, over 449 species of freshwater fish, and over 150,000 estimated species of invertebrates. Malaysia is rich with biodiversity species with a diverse flora and fauna. Although Malaysia's flora variety is not completely understood, it is extremely rich. Flora might include over 15,000 species according to a conservative estimate. There are around 38 species of real mangroves, and the diversity of mangrove plant species is equivalent to that of world diversity, with at least 70 species from 28 groups reported. However, the IUCN Red List maintains population trend data for 15,649 globally vulnerable species, with 90% dropping, 9% steady, and only 1% growing as of May 2020. Research and statistics show that this occurs due to anthropogenic causes. Now, what does anthropogenic refer to? Anthropogenic is something that is caused by human activities. So, we are going to discuss the anthropogenic impacts on the ecosystem and ecosystem conservation in Malaysia. Anthropogenic factors such as land development, overexploitation, species translocations and introductions, and pollution are the main causes towards species decreases, endangerment, and extinction. Firstly, land development causes animals to lose habitat. Next, overexploitation of wildlife can result in irreversible species and population losses, as well as resource depletion. Translocations, both accidental and purposeful, increased stress and death in relocated animals and had a detrimental influence on existing animals at the release sites. Pollutants, on the other hand, can harm animals by disrupting endocrine function, causing organ damage, increasing sensitivity to stress and illnesses, lowering reproductive success, and even death. Over 500 species have been wiped off by mankind in the previous 500 years, and the IUCN Red List now includes over 142,500 species. Human behaviors that have mostly driven animals to the brink of extinction touch you in more ways than you realize. Plants and animals keep an ecosystem healthy, and that is why they are all important. When a species becomes endangered, it indicates that an ecosystem has fallen out of balance, and the effects can be disastrous. Hence, saving endangered species improves our food supply, environment, health, and economy.
Now, let's move on to the endangered and threatened animals in Malaysia. Endangered animal species is defined as species that having a very high risk of extinction, second only to the status of critically endangered as categorized by the IUCN Red List, while threatened animal species is defined as species that has been categorized by the IUCN Red List as vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered. Now, let's take a look on the few examples of endangered animal species in Malaysia based on IUCN Red List. So the first picture is Malayan tiger. It is from family of Felidae. The genus is Panthera. It is from species of Tigris. The second picture is whiskered flying squirrel. It is from family of Pteromyidae. The genus is Ptynomys. The species is Genibarbis. The third picture is convex horseshoe bat. It is from family of Rhinolophidae. The genus is Rhinolophus. The species is from Convexus. Now, let's take a look on the few examples of threatened animal species in Malaysia based on IUCN Red List. So the first picture is known as flat-headed cat. It is from family of Felidae. The genus is Pronilurus. The species is from Planiceps. The second picture is known as banded linsang. It is from family of Viveridae. The genus is Pronodon and the species is from linsang. The third picture is known as Malayan weasel. It is from family of Mustelidae. The genus is Mustela and the species is Nudix. Now, let's move on to the endangered and threatened plant species in Malaysia. Endangered plant species is known as species that having a very high risk of extinction, second only to the status of critically endangered as categorized by the IUCN Red List, while for the threatened plant species is known as species that has been categorized by the IUCN Red List as vulnerable, endangered or critically endangered. Now, let's take a look on the what examples of endangered plant species in Malaysia based on IUCN Red List. So the first picture is Merawan. It is from species of Hopia species. The second picture is known as White Meranti. It is from species of Shorea. The third one is known as Mersawa. It is from Anisoptera species. Now, let's take a look on the examples of threatened plant species in Malaysia based on IUCN Red List. So the first picture is known as Keruing. It is from Dipterocarpus species. The second one is Red Meranti. It is from Shorea species. And the third one is Resa, which is from Vatica species.
Next, I'm gonna talk about conservation process and management of animals endangered species. The first species is Malayan tiger. This tiger is placed in the zoological parks in Peninsular Malaysia. According to Wildlife Enforcement Network, they promote interagency and international cooperation with the rest of the Asian member countries in order to manage this species. Secondly is whiskered flying squirrel. By understanding their habitat characteristic, it is the first step in conserving and managing the forest that this endangered species requires for nest cavities, winter food and gliding. Thirdly is convex horseshoe bat. In order to conserve this species, it is important to maintain the quality of habitat, particularly at roost sites. There are no specific management action target at this species, and this species is best conserved by preserving their natural remnant vegetation with good understory where it has been identified unambiguously or is thought to occur. Next, we move on to conservation process and management of animals threatened species. The first species is the flat-headed cat. This is one of the most endangered cat species in the world. In order to conserve this species, hunting and trade are prohibited in Indonesia, Malaysia and Thailand. Hunting is regulated in Singapore and there is no legal protection in Brunei. There is an urgent need for further research on the status, ecology, distribution, threats and conservation needs of this species. Second is banded linsang. This species is totally protected species in Myanmar and Thailand under the Wild Animal Reservation and Protection Act 2003. Next, we move on to conservation process and management of plants endangered species. The first species is Hopia species. In order to conserve this species, it is important to group according to their life history traits. The information generated for a species can then be adapted to species that have similar types of life history traits. Second is Shorea species. The existing habitat of this species is the only forest that can be considered as low-lying swamp forest in Parit forest that is still in existence today to conserve this species. Thirdly is Anisoptera species. By planting this species within in situ habitat and ex situ, we can ensure that this particular species is managed and utilized properly for its long-term existence. This approach is done in Baturaden Botanical Garden. Lastly, we move on to conservation process and management of plants threatened species. The first species is Dipterocarpus species. This species is one of the two totally protected plant species in Sarawak under the Sarawak Wildlife Ordinance 1998. Other than that, ex situ conservation can involve some approach of preservation of the whole plants. Lastly is Vatica species. There is a significant reduction of forest area needs appropriate planning and management for the conservation of this species, especially forests in the tropical and subtropical area.
Okay, now we are moving on the last part, which are suggestion and conclusion for this topic. Okay, the first step is we need to learn about endangered species in our area. We need to teach our friends and family about the wonderful wildlife, birds, fish, and plants that live around us. The first step to protecting endangered species is learning about how interesting and important they are. Next, visit a national wildlife refuge, park, or any open space. These protected lands provide habitat to many native wildlife, birds, fish, and plants. Scientists tell us the best way to protect endangered species is to protect the places where they live. Wildlife-related recreation creates millions of jobs and support local businesses. Make our home wildlife friendly. Secure garbage in shelter or cans with locking lids. Feed pets indoor and lock pets' doors at night to avoid attracting wild animals into our home. Next, native plants provide food and shelter for native wildlife. Attracting native insects like bees and butterflies can help pollinate your plants. The spread of non-native species has greatly impacted native population around the world. Invasive species compete with native species for resource and habitat. They can even prey on native species directly, forcing native species toward extinction. Herbicides and pesticides may keep yard looking nice, but they are in fact hazardous pollutants that affect wildlife at many levels. Many herbicides and pesticides take long time to degrade and build up in the soils or throughout the food chain. Some groups of animals such as amphibians are particularly vulnerable to these chemical pollutants and suffer greatly as a result of high level of herbicides and pesticides in their habitats. Next, the most interesting yet unbelievable one. Yes, we have to slow down the speed while driving. Many animals live in developed areas, and this means they must navigate a landscape full of human hazard. Next, recycle and buy sustainable products. Never purchase products made from threatened or endangered species. Overseas trips can be exciting and fun, and everyone wants a souvenir. But sometimes, the souvenirs are made from species nearing extinction. Avoid supporting the market in illegal wildlife, including ivory and coral. Harassing wildlife is bad and illegal. Shooting, trapping, or forcing a threatened or endangered animals into captivity is also illegal and can lead to their extinction. Last but not least, protect wildlife habitats. Perhaps the greatest threat that faces many species in the widespread destruction of habitats. Scientists tell us the best way to protect endangered species is to protect the species' places where they live. Wildlife must have places to find food, shelter, and raise their young. Logging, oil and gas drilling, overgrazing, and development all result habitat destruction. Endangered species habitat should be protected, and this impact will be minimized. Can you imagine walking in the woods without hearing birds singing, or picture what a field would be like without wildflowers blooming? Our plants and wildlife make the world more interesting and beautiful place. More importantly, all living species, including people, depend on each other for survival. From this video, we have learned the anthropogenic factor and effects, endangered and threatened species in Malaysia, conservation process and management of the species, and last but not least, few suggestions in order to save the animal and plants. Endangered and threatened species need our help, so let's turn the gear and make the move. That's the end of our presentation. Thank you for watching.